Arizona Territory, summer of 1878. The town of Gallows Creek clung to the edge of the Sonoran Desert like a stubborn growth on parched earth, a collection of weather-beaten buildings baking under the merciless sun. It was the kind of place folks only found if they were desperately lost or deliberately hiding from something worse than heat and isolation. And Catherine Winters had been hiding here for exactly 12 years. Few knew her story, fewer dared to ask, but all of them would soon witness what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose finally takes a stand against the most notorious gang in the territory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. When the Blackburn gang rode into town that scorching July morning, they thought they'd found another easy target, just a quiet widow running a modest gunsmith shop with nothing but an ancient Colt revolver displayed in a shadow box above her workbench. They didn't know that Revolver had never missed a kill shot in her hands. They were about to learn. Gallows Creek sat in the shadow of the Dragoon Mountains, a forgotten patch of civilization where Arizona Territory stretched toward the Mexican border. Summer had turned the surrounding landscape golden brown, the heat shimmering above the cracked earth. Saguaros stood like silent sentinels across the terrain, their arms reaching skyward in perpetual surrender to the relentless sun. The town consisted of little more than one main street with a handful of side alleys. Dust devils danced through the thoroughfare, stirring up dirt that settled on the weathered wooden buildings: Winter's gunsmith shop, Dawson's saloon, a small hotel run by the McCreary family, Sheriff Holt's office and jail, Doc Parnell's combined home and medical practice, and a scattering of other establishments made up the heart of the settlement. Beyond the town limits, scattered ranches dotted the landscape, most struggling against drought and the constant threat of Apache raids. The creek that gave the town its name had dried to little more than a trickle, winding through the northern edge of the settlement. Old-timers said it once ran clear and cool before the drought years began. Now it was barely enough to sustain the town's needs. Gallows Creek earned its grim name from the hanging tree that stood at the western edge of town. A massive cottonwood with one thick branch extending horizontally, perfect for frontier justice. No one had been hanged there in years, but the tree remained as a reminder of the thin line between civilization and chaos in the territories. The wind whispered through gaps in the weathered buildings, carrying the scent of dust and sage. The eastern end of town, Winter's gunsmith shop, stood slightly apart from the others, a sturdy adobe structure with a wooden porch that had weathered 12 Arizona summers. Catherine had built it herself after the passing of her husband, brick by sun-dried brick. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm glow over glass display cases containing revolvers, rifles, and ammunition. The rich smell of gun oil and leather permeated the air. A workbench dominated the back wall, covered with the specialized tools of a gunsmith's trade: files, punches, hammers, and precision instruments for sighting and calibration. A pot-bellied stove stood cold in the corner, unnecessary in the summer heat, but essential during the brief, chilly desert winters. Behind the counter stood Catherine Winters, her hands moving with practiced precision as she reassembled a Winchester rifle for one of the local ranchers. At 43, her face held the weathered lines of someone who had seen too much, too soon, but her posture remained straight as a rifle barrel, unbending despite everything life had thrown at her. Her chestnut hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back in a practical braid that hung down her back. She wore a simple cotton dress beneath a leather apron, her sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms strong from years of metalwork. Catherine's movements were efficient, economical, nothing wasted. 12 years she'd run this gunsmith shop alone. 12 years since Thomas had been laid to rest in the small cemetery on the hill outside town. 12 years of survival, one day at a time. Above the workbench hung a shadow box containing an old Colt Navy revolver, its wooden grip worn smooth with age, brass fittings gleaming in the lamplight. It wasn't a decorative piece. Anyone who looked closely could see it was meticulously maintained, the blued steel free of rust, the action clean. Locals knew better than to comment on it, but newcomers often made the mistake of asking why such an outdated weapon held such a place of honor when newer, more powerful guns were available. Catherine rarely bothered to explain. Let them think what they wanted. The Colt stayed where it was, within reach, but out of the way, like a silent guardian. The bell above the door jangled as Sheriff Emmett Holt pushed his way inside, his boots leaving dusty footprints on the plank floor. At 58, Holt was lean and weathered, his once black hair now mostly grey beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His badge gleamed dully in the lamplight as he approached the counter. "Afternoon, Catherine," he said, removing his hat. "Just making my rounds." Catherine nodded, not looking up from her work on the Winchester. Her hands moved steadily, fitting the barrel back into position with practiced ease. Holt leaned against the counter, his eyes drifting to the rifle parts spread across the workbench behind her. "Running low on supplies?" "Supply wagons 2 weeks late," she replied, making another adjustment to the rifle's sight. "Hendricks promised they'll be here by month's end." Holt's mouth twitched slightly. "What did he say last month?" Catherine's hands paused for a fraction of a second. "And the month before?" She finally looked up, her grey eyes meeting his. "Something on your mind, Emmett?" The sheriff sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Got word from Tucson yesterday. The Blackburn gang hit another settlement north of here, cleaned out the general store, shot the owner when he tried to stop them." Catherine's expression didn't change, but her grip on the screwdriver tightened slightly. "They're moving south, then?" "Appears so." Holt's gaze drifted to the Colt, in its shadow box. "Might be nothing, but I thought you should know. I appreciate the warning." Catherine returned to her work, calibrating the rifle's sight with minute adjustments, the conversation clearly over as far as she was concerned. Holt replaced his hat, hesitated, then added, "They've got 7 riders now. Picked up some young hotheads in Prescott." "More fools don't make for better odds," Catherine replied without looking up. "Just makes for more noise." The sheriff chuckled despite himself. "Suppose that's true." His expression grew serious again. "Still, I might want to close up early these next few days, at least until we know they've moved on. Been running this shop at the same hours for 12 years, Emmett. Don't plan on changing that now." Holt recognized the steel in her voice, and knew there was no point arguing. He nodded, tipped his hat, and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, looking back at her. "Thomas would have wanted you safe, Catherine." For a moment, something flickered across Catherine's face, a shadow of something deeper than the stoic expression she usually wore. Then it was gone, replaced by the same unreadable mask. "Thomas isn't here," she said simply. "I am." After Holt left, Catherine continued working on the Winchester, but her mind had drifted to the past. Thomas had built their first shop with his own hands when they'd arrived in Gallows Creek, full of dreams about a new life on the frontier. He'd been a gifted gunsmith, known throughout the territory for his steady hands and precision work. Those same hands had taught Catherine everything she knew about the craft. The bell jangled again, pulling Catherine from her thoughts. Eleanor Parnell stepped inside, her medical bag clutched in one hand. At 37, the doctor was one of the few educated women in the territory, having studied in Philadelphia before answering the call for medical practitioners in the West. Her blonde hair was pinned up neatly beneath a practical hat, her clothes simple but well-made despite the frontier setting. "Thought I might find the sheriff here," she said, setting her bag on the counter. "Just missed him," Catherine replied, setting aside the Winchester. "Something wrong?" Eleanor shook her head. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Just some medical supplies I ordered. Wanted to know if they'd arrived with the mail. Nothing yet. Coffee then, please. Catherine moved to the stove where a pot of coffee simmered throughout the day. She poured 2 cups, sliding one across the counter to Eleanor, who accepted it gratefully. Heard about the Blackburn gang, Eleanor said after taking a sip. Catherine nodded. Emmett just told me. They say Wade Blackburn killed his first man at 15. Eleanor's voice dropped. Shot him over a horse race dispute? Men like that don't impress me, Catherine replied, her tone flat. Cowards with guns thinking it makes them important. Eleanor studied her friend over the rim of her cup. Most folks in town knew little about Catherine's life before Gallows Creek. She'd arrived with Thomas 15 years ago, already carrying herself with that same quiet dignity and reserve. There were rumors, of course, there always were in small towns, but Catherine had never confirmed or denied any of them. I've been meaning to ask, Eleanor said carefully. That Colt of yours, family heirloom? Catherine's expression softened slightly. My father's. He taught me to shoot with it when I was just a girl. That's young, not where I grew up. Catherine's eyes took on a distant look. Pa said a woman should know how to protect herself in a world that wouldn't always be kind. Wise man. He was. Catherine's fingers traced an invisible pattern on the counter. Died in 57, Apache raid on our homestead. Eleanor nodded sympathetically. Death was a constant companion on the frontier. Few families remained untouched by its reach. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The light was beginning to fade, the scorching day giving way to what promised to be a cooler evening. Catherine glanced at the small clock on the shelf behind her. Should be closing up soon, she said. Eleanor finished her coffee. I should get back. Mrs. Donovan's time is getting close. As the doctor gathered her things, the door opened again. Jacob Dawson, owner of the town's only saloon, stepped inside. At 50, Dawson had the ruddy complexion of a man who sampled his own whiskey too often, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Ladies, he said, nodding to them both. Catherine, got. A moment, Eleanor took the hint. I'll check back tomorrow about those supplies, she said to Catherine, then nodded to Dawson as she left. Dawson waited until the door closed behind the doctor before speaking. Holt came by the saloon, told me about the Blackburn gang. Seems he's making the rounds. As he should, Catherine replied, gathering the coffee cups. Got me thinking. Dawson shifted his weight. Last time we had trouble, those cattle rustlers 2 years back, we formed a town watch. Might be worth doing again. Catherine set the cups down. And who would you have watch, Jacob? McCreary's too old. Parnell's needed for medical emergencies. And the Bennett brothers can barely stay awake during Sunday service. Dawson's mouth twitched. Got 8 willing to stand night shifts, 2 at each corner of town. Armed. With what? Pitchforks. They've got rifles. And how many have actually fired one at something other than a coyote or a tin can? Dawson hesitated. That's exactly the point. Catherine crossed her arms. You put inexperienced men with guns against killers. All you'll get is more graves to dig. The saloon keeper's expression hardened. So what would you suggest? Just wait for them to ride in and take whatever they want? Catherine's gaze drifted to the Colt above her workbench. I'm suggesting we don't make ourselves easy targets. Lock doors, keep valuables hidden, and don't try to be heroes. Dawson studied her for a long moment. There's something about you, Catherine Winters. Always has been, like you've seen things the rest of us haven't. She met his gaze steadily. We've all seen things, Jacob. Some of us just remember the lessons better than others. Preparing and narrating this story takes time, so if you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. It means the world to us. Now, back to Catherine Winters and the approaching Blackburn gang. After Dawson left, Catherine finished closing the shop. She moved methodically around the space, checking windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. The routine was comforting, the same actions day after day, a form of control in a world that often offered none. Upstairs in her living quarters, Catherine lit the lamp on her small table. The room was Spartan but comfortable. A bed, a dresser, a rocking chair near the window that overlooked the main street. On the dresser sat a daguerreotype of Thomas, his serious expression softened by the slight curve of his lips. Beside it lay a smaller image in an ornate silver frame, carefully positioned face down. Catherine picked up the frame, turning it over slowly. A young girl stared back at her, no more than 6 years old, with Catherine's eyes and Thomas's smile. Emily, their daughter, lost to fever the winter before Thomas's death. Some days, Catherine could barely remember her face. Other days, the memory was so vivid it felt like physical pain. She set the frame down gently, then moved to the window. The main street lay quiet in the gathering darkness, lanterns beginning to glow in windows along its length. In the distance, she could see the lights of Dawson's saloon, the only building still fully awake at this hour. Catherine's gaze drifted upward to the stars emerging in the clear Arizona sky. The same stars she'd watched as a girl in Texas, where her father had first placed the Colt Navy in her small hands and taught her to respect its power. The same stars she'd followed west with Thomas, full of hope for their future. The same stars that had witnessed everything she'd lost, and perhaps everything she still had left to give. As she turned from the window, her eyes fell on the old wooden chest at the foot of her bed. She hadn't opened it in years and had no reason to, but tonight something pulled her toward it. Catherine knelt before the chest, running her fingers along the worn edges before lifting the heavy lid. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, lay her past, a past she'd packed away long ago. Catherine unwrapped the bundle slowly, revealing a worn leather gun belt with a holster perfectly sized for the Colt Navy that now hung above her workbench downstairs. Beneath it lay a stack of yellowed papers, the topmost bearing an illustration of a young woman with a determined expression and a reward of $500 for information leading to her capture. The name printed below the illustration read, Catherine Holloway, alias Deadeye Kate. Catherine touched the paper gently, tracing the outline of a face she barely recognized anymore. Long before she was Catherine Winters, gunsmith's widow of Gallows Creek, she had been someone else entirely, someone even the Blackburn gang would have thought twice about crossing. She rewrapped the wanted poster and gun belt, returning them to the chest. No need for those yet. The Colt would be enough if it came to that. It always had been. As she closed the chest, Catherine felt a strange calm settle over her. 12 years of quiet existence in Gallows Creek had dulled her edges, but hadn't broken. If trouble was coming, she would meet it head-on as she always had. Let them come, she thought again. Let them come. Dawn broke over Gallows Creek with streaks of orange and gold painting the eastern sky, promising another scorching day. The town awakened slowly, reluctantly, like a patient rousing from anesthesia. Smoke curled from chimneys as breakfast fires were stoked, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the dry desert air. Sheriff Emmett Holt made his first rounds before sunrise, a habit formed during 30 years of wearing a badge. He walked the length of Main Street, boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt, eyes scanning for anything out of place. The town felt different this morning, quieter, more watchful. Word about the Blackburn gang had spread quickly, as news always did in small communities. Holt paused outside Winter's gunsmith shop. Light already glowed behind the curtained windows, a sign that Catherine was awake and moving about. She always rose with the sun, another habit that hadn't changed in all the years he'd known her. He hesitated before continuing on his way. Something about his conversation with Catherine yesterday still nagged at him. Her calm in the face of potential danger wasn't surprising. She'd always been steady as bedrock, but there had been something else in her eyes when he mentioned the Blackburn gang. Not fear, something colder, more focused. Holt had served as sheriff in 2 different territories over his long career. He'd developed a sense for people, could usually tell the difference between those who talked brave and those who lived it. Catherine Winters fell firmly in the latter category, though he'd never quite understood why a gunsmith's widow should have eyes that assessed threats like a veteran scout. The sheriff tipped his hat to Harvey Thompson as the elderly postmaster unlocked the door to the small building that served as both post office and telegraph office. Thompson nodded back, his arthritic hands fumbling slightly with his keys. "Any word from Tucson?" Holt asked. Thompson shook his head. "Lines went down yesterday. Probably those monsoon storms up north." Holt frowned. "With the telegraph down, we're even more isolated than usual. Let me know when it's back up." "Will do, Sheriff." Thompson paused. "Heard about those outlaws. You think they're really headed this way?" "Just being cautious," Holt replied, not wanting to fuel the rumors already circulating. "No need for alarm." Thompson snorted. "Tell that to the Parnells. Doctor's husband was cleaning his shotgun half the night. Could hear him loading and unloading the damn thing from my place." Holt suppressed a sigh. Andrew Parnell was a scholarly man, more comfortable with books than firearms. The thought of him trying to defend the town with a shotgun was concerning. "I'll have a word with him." "You do that." Thompson disappeared inside the post office, the door closing behind him with a familiar creak. The sheriff continued his rounds, nodding to the few townsfolk already about their morning business. By the time he returned to his office, the sun had fully cleared the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. Inside, he found his deputy, young Will Barton, asleep in a chair, boots propped on the desk. At 24, Barton was eager but inexperienced, the son of an old friend who had asked Holt to give the boy a chance after he'd gotten into trouble in Prescott. "Wake up," Holt said sharply. Barton startled, nearly toppling backwards in his chair. "Sorry, Sheriff," he exclaimed, straightening quickly. "Just resting my eyes." "Save it for your off hours." Holt hung his hat on a peg by the door. "Any trouble last night?" "Quiet as a church," Barton replied, smoothing his rumpled clothes. "Except for a fight at Dawson's around midnight. Just miners blowing off steam." Holt nodded, unsurprised. "Anyone hurt?" "Nothing serious. Dawson broke it up before it got out of hand." "Good." Holt moved to the small stove in the corner, pouring himself coffee from the pot Barton had prepared earlier. "It was bitter and overboiled, but it was hot. I want you to make an extra round this afternoon. Check the outlying properties, too." Barton's expression brightened at the prospect of additional responsibility. "You really think the Blackburn gang might come here?" Holt sipped his coffee, hiding a grimace at the taste. "I think it pays to be prepared, and I need you sharp, not jumping at shadows. These men aren't to be taken lightly. I heard Wade Blackburn once shot a man just for looking at his horse wrong," Barton said, eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and fascination. Holt fixed him with a stern look. "Whatever you've heard, the reality is worse. Blackburn and his men don't leave witnesses, and they don't show mercy. If they come, and that's still an if, we avoid confrontation if possible." "But it's our job to protect the town," Barton protested, his voice rising with indignation. "Our job is to keep people alive," Holt corrected. "Sometimes that means knowing when not to draw your gun." The deputy looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. "Yes, sir. Get some sleep. I need you back here at noon clear-headed." Catherine woke before dawn, roused not by nightmares but by instinct. Something felt different in the still morning air. She dressed quickly, forgoing her usual apron for a dark blouse that allowed freer movement. From beneath her bed, she retrieved a small wooden case, opening it to reveal a cleaning kit and ammunition for the Colt Navy. She moved silently through the pre-dawn darkness, descending the back stairs that led directly to the workshop behind her store. The familiar smell of gun oil and metal shavings greeted her as she lit a single lantern, keeping the light low. Catherine worked methodically, loading the Colt with fresh cartridges, checking and double-checking the action. Her fingers remembered every curve and edge of the weapon, like reuniting with an old friend. Outside her window, Gallows Creek was still sleeping. Only the occasional barking dog or distant coyote call disturbed the silence. Catherine carried the loaded Colt to the window, peering through the gathering dawn light toward the western approach to town. The road stretched empty into the distance, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood at attention. The Blackburn gang was coming. Not today, perhaps, but soon. Catherine holstered the Colt and slipped outside, locking the workshop behind her. She moved through the shadows to the edge of town, climbing the small rise that overlooked the western trail. As the first pink streaks of dawn colored the sky, she settled behind a large boulder, the Colt resting comfortably in her hand. For the next hour, she practiced drawing and aiming, never actually firing. Sound carried too far in the desert morning. Each motion was fluid, economical, the muscle memory returning as if she'd never stopped. By the time the sun crested the horizon, Catherine's confidence had solidified into certainty. If it came to it, she would be ready. Back at her shop, Catherine returned the Colt to its shadow box, though now a loaded Remington rested beneath the counter within easy reach. She proceeded with her morning routine, sweeping the porch, opening the shutters, placing the open sign in the window. No one would know anything had changed. The morning brought a steady stream of customers, most carrying guns that needed repair, or buying extra ammunition. Catherine noted the nervous energy in their voices, the darting glances toward the street. News of the Blackburn gang had spread through Gallows Creek like wildfire, transforming the town's usual languor into tense vigilance. "Heard they hit a ranch just 50 miles north," Frank Jenkins said, as Catherine repaired the firing pin on his Sharps rifle. The grizzled rancher leaned against her counter, chewing nervously on an unlit cigar. "Killed everyone, even the women." Catherine's hands never paused in their work. "People talk, Frank. Stories grow with each telling." Jenkins shook his head. "This ain't just talk. My cousin's boy rode with the burial detail. Said it was the worst thing he'd ever seen." Catherine looked up, meeting Jenkins' anxious gaze. "What would you have me say? That we should all pack up and flee?" "Course not," Jenkins muttered. "Just saying a person ought to be prepared." "Then prepare," Catherine replied simply, returning to her work. "Not by spreading fear, but by being ready." As Jenkins left with his repaired rifle, Sheriff Holt entered, his expression grim. Without preamble, he placed a telegram on the counter. Catherine wiped her hands on a cloth before picking it up. "Telegraph's back up," Holt said unnecessarily as she read. "Blackburn gang spotted Cisco Junction. Stop 7 riders heavily armed. Stop killed 3 deputies. Stop heading south. Stop federal marshals notified. Stop expect arrival 4 days. Stop Catherine." Set the telegram down, her expression unchanged. 4 days? If they're coming here at all, Holt added, though his tone lacked conviction. "They're coming," Catherine said with quiet certainty. "Cisco Junction's only a day's ride north. They'll be here by tomorrow, maybe the day after." Holt studied her. "What makes you so sure?" Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Because this town has what they want. Isolated, minimal law enforcement, wealthy ranchers who bank their money locally, and a reputation for being peaceful. Easy pickings." Holt concluded grimly. "That's how they see it." The sheriff ran a hand through his grey hair. "I put together that town watch Dawson was lobbying for. 8 men rotating in pairs, best shots I could find." Catherine's disapproval must have shown on her face because Holt continued defensively. "I know what you said, but I can't just do nothing. These are good men." Good men make good corpses when facing killers, Catherine replied. Her voice softened slightly at Holt's crestfallen expression. But you're right. Something must be done. What would you suggest? Catherine considered for a moment. Your men should watch, not engage. If they see the gang approaching, fire a warning shot. 3 quick rounds, then fall back. Don't try to hold them off. Holt nodded slowly. And then we meet them here, in town, on our terms, not theirs. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. We, Catherine gestured around her shop. I know every gun in this town, Emmett. Know who can shoot and who just likes to wear a sidearm for show. Find me 5 men who won't panic at the first sign of trouble. I'll work with them. Holt's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Since when does a gunsmith teach tactics? Catherine held his gaze without flinching. Since she learned from the best. She paused. Thomas didn't just teach me how to fix guns. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough to satisfy Holt for now. He nodded, seemingly relieved to have someone sharing the burden of the town's defense. I'll send them by this afternoon, he said, moving toward the door. And Catherine, be gentle with them. They're not soldiers. Neither am I, she replied. Not anymore. The words slipped out before she could catch them. Holt paused at the door, a question forming on his lips, but Catherine had already turned away, busying herself with the Winchester on her workbench. After a moment, the sheriff left without another word. Alone again, Catherine exhaled slowly. The careful wall between her past and present was crumbling, cracks appearing with each passing hour. Soon there would be no separation at all. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt oddly liberated. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, the air shimmering above the hard-packed dirt of Main Street. Most townsfolk had retreated indoors, seeking refuge from the punishing sun. Catherine stood in the doorway of her shop, scanning the street with practiced eyes. Everything seemed normal. A few horses hitched outside Dawson's saloon, the general store's awning extended to provide shade, 2 old-timers playing checkers on the hotel porch. Yet beneath the surface calm, she sensed the town's growing tension. Ariai's door to Dr. Parnell's office opened across the street, and Eleanor emerged with her husband, Andrew. Catherine watched as they engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Eleanor gesturing emphatically while Andrew shook his head. Finally, the doctor threw up her hands in frustration and returned inside, leaving her husband standing alone on the porch, looking miserable. After a moment's hesitation, Andrew crossed the street toward Catherine's shop. A scholarly man in his early 40s, Andrew Parnell had come west to document native flora and fauna, meeting Eleanor during his travels. He'd stayed for love, but the frontier had never suited him. His spectacles sat slightly askew on his nose, and his clothes, though of good quality, seemed perpetually rumpled. "Mrs. Winters," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Might I have a word?" Catherine stepped aside, allowing him to enter the shop. "Something I can help you with, Mr. Parnell." Andrew fidgeted with his hat, clearly uncomfortable. "It's about this gang everyone's talking about. Eleanor says they're dangerous men." "They are," Catherine confirmed, watching him carefully. "I've never—" He swallowed hard. "That is to say, I've never had cause to use a firearm against another person." Understanding dawned. "And now you're worried you might have to." Andrew nodded miserably. "Eleanor keeps a revolver for protection. I've fired it. At bottles, but that's hardly the same as—" He broke off, unable to complete the thought. Catherine studied him for a moment, seeing not cowardice but honest fear, the natural response of a gentle man confronted by violence. "No," she agreed. "It's not the same." She moved to one of the display cases, unlocking it to withdraw a sleek, short-barreled shotgun. "This might suit you better. Requires less precision than a revolver. Just point in the general direction and squeeze the trigger." Andrew eyed the weapon warily. "I don't know. There's no shame in protecting your wife and yourself," Catherine said quietly. or in being afraid, only in letting fear rule you. Andrew met her gaze, something in her words seeming to reach him. Hesitantly, he reached for the shotgun. Catherine showed him how to load it, how to hold it, the proper stance to absorb the recoil. "Remember," she said as she accompanied him to the door, "this is a last resort. If trouble comes, get Eleanor and yourself somewhere secure, the cellar beneath. Your office would serve well." Andrew nodded, clutching the shotgun with newfound determination. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." As he crossed back to the doctor's office, Catherine noticed Eleanor watching from the window. The two women exchanged a nod of understanding before Eleanor disappeared back inside. The afternoon brought Sheriff Holt's promised volunteers, 5 men of varying ages, each looking both nervous and determined. Catherine recognized them all. Daniel Cooper, a rancher with military experience from the war between the states. The Sloan brothers, Jim and Frank, who ran the livery stable. Harvey Miller, the blacksmith whose hands were nearly as skilled with iron as Catherine's were with firearms. And to her surprise, Jacob Dawson, the saloon keeper. "Figured if I was going to suggest a town watch, I ought to volunteer myself," Dawson explained, noting her raised eyebrow. Catherine led them to the space behind her shop, where she had set up a series of targets against the back wall. "Sheriff Holt says you've all volunteered to defend the town," she began, her voice carrying across the yard. "That's commendable. It's also potentially suicidal if you don't know what you're facing." She paced before them, sizing each man up. "The Blackburn gang isn't just a group of common thieves. They're killers who enjoy their work. Wade Blackburn was a Confederate guerrilla during the war. His brother Luke rode with Quantrill's raiders. The others are cutthroats and murderers, each with a price on his head." Catherine stopped pacing, turning to face them directly. "If you stand against them, they will try to kill you. Not wound, not scare. Kill. Is that understood?" The men exchanged glances, but none backed down. Daniel Cooper spoke first, his voice steady. "We understand, Mrs. Winters. That's why we're here, to learn how to stop them." Catherine nodded, satisfied with his answer. "Then let's begin." For the next 2 hours, Catherine worked with the men, assessing their shooting skills, correcting stances, teaching them about cover and concealment. Cooper already showed considerable proficiency, the others less so, but all were willing to learn. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Catherine felt cautiously optimistic about their chances. "Same time tomorrow," she instructed as they gathered their weapons, "and bring whatever firearms you intend to use if trouble comes. I want to make sure they're all in working order." As the men dispersed, Jacob Dawson lingered behind. "You're good at this," he observed. "Teaching, I mean, almost like you've done it before." Catherine began cleaning up the spent cartridges, not meeting his eyes. "Thomas taught soldier boys during the war. I picked up a few things," Dawson nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, whatever you learned, I'm grateful you're sharing it now." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, there's a stranger in town. Arrived about an hour ago. Tall fellow, well-dressed, asking questions at the hotel." Catherine's hands stilled. "What kind of questions?" "About the town, mostly. Who lives here? How long they've been around?" Dawson shrugged. "Could be nothing. Traveling salesman, maybe. But with everything that's happening, I'll look into it," Catherine promised. "Thank you for letting me know." After Dawson left, Catherine retrieved the Remington from beneath the counter and slipped it into the pocket of her skirt. If Wade Blackburn was smart, and by all accounts he was, he would send a scout ahead to assess the town before bringing in his gang. The sun was setting as Catherine locked up her shop and headed toward the hotel. The evening air had cooled, slightly, bringing welcome relief from the day's heat. A few townsfolk nodded to her as she passed, their faces tight with unspoken tension. The McCreary Hotel stood at the far end of Main Street, a two-story wooden structure with a broad porch, and clean rooms reasonably priced. As Catherine approached, she saw a man she didn't recognize sitting in one of the rocking chairs, smoking a cigar. Tall and lean, dressed in a dark suit that seemed too formal for the frontier, he had the watchful eyes of a predator assessing potential prey. Catherine climbed the steps and nodded politely as she passed him, feeling his gaze follow her into the hotel lobby. Martha McCreary looked up from the ledger at the front desk, her expression brightening. "Catherine, what brings you by? Need a room for someone?" "Just curious about your new guest," Catherine replied quietly. "The gentleman on the porch," Martha's smile dimmed slightly, "calls himself James Smith, paid for 3 nights in advance, said he's scouting mining investments." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Has the nicest manners, but something about him doesn't sit right. Too smooth, if you know what I mean." Catherine knew exactly what she meant. "Has he asked about anyone in particular?" Martha thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, he did ask if we had a gunsmith in town. I told him about you and Thomas, God rest his soul. Said he might need some work done on his pistol." "I see." "Well, if he comes by, send word to Sheriff Holt, would you?" Discreetly. Martha's eyes widened with understanding. "You think he's with those outlaws everyone's talking about?" "I think it pays to be careful," Catherine replied. "Good evening, Martha." As Catherine turned to leave, she nearly collided with James Smith, who had entered silently behind her. Up close, she could see the hardness in his pale eyes, the slight bulge of a concealed weapon beneath his well-tailored jacket. "Pardon me, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. His voice carried the soft drawl of Texas or perhaps Louisiana. "Didn't mean to startle you." "No harm done," Catherine replied evenly. "You must be Mrs. Winters, the gunsmith. Martha was just telling me about your establishment." He extended his hand. "James Smith, pleasure to make your acquaintance." Catherine took his hand briefly, noting the calluses that spoke of frequent gun use. "Welcome to Gallows Creek, Mr. Smith. What brings you to our little town?" "Business opportunities," he replied smoothly. "I represent some investors interested in the region." "Not much to invest in around here," Catherine observed. "The mines played out years ago." Smith's smile didn't reach his eyes. "There's always opportunity for those who know where to look." Their gazes locked for a moment, each taking the measure of the other. Catherine saw the calculation behind his polite facade, the assessment of a man determining whether she represented a threat. "Well," she said, breaking the silence, "if you need any work done on your firearms, my shop's at the east end of Main Street." "I might just take you up on that," Smith replied. "I've heard you're quite skilled with guns, Mrs. Winters." The emphasis he placed on the words sent a chill down Catherine's spine. This was no random encounter. He knew something. Or suspected. "At least, my husband was the true craftsman," she said carefully. "I merely carry on his work." Smith nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "A noble endeavor. Thomas Winters, wasn't it? Such a tragedy, his passing, shot during a robbery." "I believe—" Catherine's body tensed. Though she kept her expression neutral, no one in town would have shared those details with a stranger. "You seem well informed for someone who just arrived, Mr. Smith." His smile widened, revealing perfect teeth. "I make it my business to know things, Mrs. Winters. Information is valuable in my line of work." "And what line of work is that exactly?" Smith merely tipped his hat again. "Good evening, Mrs. Winters. I'm sure we'll speak again soon." As he moved past her toward the stairs, Catherine turned to watch him go, a growing certainty settling in her stomach like lead. James Smith, if that was indeed his name, wasn't just a scout for the Blackburn gang. He was something else entirely, perhaps a bounty hunter, or worse, a Pinkerton agent. Either way, he wasn't just after the town's money, he was after her. Catherine slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with faces from the past. Thomas smiling in the sunlight, Emily laughing as she chased butterflies, and darker memories. Gunfire in the darkness, men falling before her colt, blood staining the Texas dirt. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. After washing and dressing, she moved silently to the small cedar chest tucked in the corner of her bedroom. Inside, beneath several folded shawls, lay a leather-bound journal. Catherine hadn't written in it for years, but tonight she felt compelled to record her thoughts, to leave some testament if things went badly in the coming days. July 18th, 1878. They know I'm here. The man who calls himself Smith is no mining investor. The way he watches, the questions he asks, he's hunting, whether for the Blackburns or for himself, hardly matters. 12 years of hiding, and now the past has found me anyway. Perhaps it was always meant to. If I don't survive what's coming, I want the truth known. My name was Catherine Holloway. I rode with Hayes Rangers during the war, tracking Confederate raiders along the Texas border. After, when lawlessness spread across the frontier, I continued the work, capturing or killing men who preyed on others. They called me Dead-Eye Kate, said my colt never missed its mark. It was true until the day it wasn't, until I shot the wrong man based on false information, and everything changed. I've spent 12 years atoning for that mistake. If my death comes now, let it at least protect this town that gave me shelter when I had none. Catherine closed the journal and returned it to its hiding place. The confession felt like setting down a heavy burden she'd carried too long. Whatever happened next, the truth was there for whoever might seek it. The rising sun painted Gallows Creek in hues of amber and gold as Catherine made her way to her shop. The town was stirring earlier than usual, an undercurrent of tension running through the morning activities. Doors opened and closed more quickly, voices were hushed, eyes constantly scanned the horizon. Inside her shop, Catherine found the shotgun she'd recommended to Andrew Parnell, loading it with fresh shells and setting it aside. Whether the doctor's husband found his courage or not, the weapon would be ready. Next, she carefully removed the Colt Navy from its shadow box, strapping the worn leather holster to her hip beneath her apron. The familiar weight was both comfort and reminder. The bell above the door jangled, and Catherine looked up to see James Smith standing in the entrance, his tall frame backlit by the morning sun. He wore the same dark suit as yesterday, though now she noticed the subtle bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. "Mrs. Winters," he said, removing his hat. "I hope I'm not calling too early." "I open at sunrise," Catherine replied evenly. "What can I help you with, Mr. Smith?" He stepped further into the shop, his gaze sweeping over the weapons displayed in the glass cases. "I find myself in need of ammunition, .45 caliber if you have it." Catherine moved to a cabinet behind, the counter her movements deliberately unhurried. "Planning some target practice?" "Something like that." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Always wise to keep one's skills sharp." Catherine placed a box of cartridges on the counter between them. "That'll be 50 cents. Smith laid a silver dollar on the counter, making no move to take the ammunition. "Keep the change. Consider it payment for information." "I don't sell information, Mr. Smith. Just guns and ammunition." His expression hardened slightly. "I think you'll want to make an exception. In this case," he slid a folded paper across the counter. "I'm looking for this woman." Catherine didn't touch the paper, but she could see enough of the unfolded edge to recognize her own face, younger but unmistakable, staring back from a faded wanted poster. "That's an old poster," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Must be 15 years at least." 16, Smith corrected, "from just after the war. Catherine Holloway, known as Dead-Eye Kate, wanted for the murder of Judge Samuel Thornton in Laredo, Texas." Catherine met his gaze without flinching. "And what makes you think you'll find her here?" Smith smiled thinly. Call it a hunch. I've been tracking her for a long time, Mrs. Winters. Following whispers and rumors across 4 territories, the trail led me here to this forgotten speck of dust with its notorious female gunsmith. Notorious? Catherine raised an eyebrow. I fix guns for ranchers and shopkeepers, hardly the stuff of legend. Perhaps. Smith tucked the poster back into his jacket. But I find it interesting that your husband died exactly 1 day after a Pinkerton agent passed through town asking questions about new arrivals. Struck by a stray bullet in a saloon fight, I believe? Very convenient. Catherine's hand inched closer to the Remington beneath the counter. Are you implying I had something to do with my husband's death, Mr. Smith? Not at all. His smile widened. I'm merely noting a pattern. Wherever Catherine Holloway went, people who asked too many questions tended to meet unfortunate ends. If you believe I'm this. Deadeye Kate, Catherine said, the name feeling strange on her tongue after so many years. Why not simply arrest me? You are a lawman, aren't you? Smith chuckled. Not exactly. I work for Judge Thornton's son. He's offered a substantial private bounty for the woman who killed his father, dead or alive. He leaned forward slightly. But I must admit I'm curious. The stories say you never missed a shot. That true? Catherine remained silent, her expression betraying nothing. I wonder, Smith continued, his voice deceptively casual, what would make such a legendary markswoman settle in a dust trap like Gallows Creek? Was it love? He glanced at the photograph of Thomas, visible on a shelf behind her. Or just a convenient cover? I think you should leave now, Mr. Smith. Catherine's voice was cold, her hand now resting on the Remington's grip. Smith straightened, making no move for his own weapon. Of course. We'll continue this conversation another time. He tipped his hat. Oh, and Mrs. Winters, I'd advise against trying to run. I've invested too much time finding you to let you disappear again. After he left, Catherine stood motionless, her heart hammering in her chest. Smith wasn't just a bounty hunter. He was an obsessed one, a man who had dedicated years to hunting her down. Such men didn't give up easily. And now, with the Blackburn gang approaching, she was caught between 2 deadly threats. The hours crawled by, each customer entering the shop making Catherine tense until she recognized their face. By midday, rumors were circulating that riders had been spotted to the north, still distant, but definitely heading toward Gallows Creek. Sheriff Holt burst into the shop just after noon, his face flushed. Telegram from Federal Marshal Harrington, he said without preamble. He can't get here for at least 5 days. Says we should evacuate the town if possible. Evacuate to where? Catherine asked. The nearest settlement is 2 days' ride and half the town has nowhere else to go. Holt removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I know, but I had to call a town meeting. People deserve to know what's coming. Catherine nodded, understanding his position. When? 2 o'clock at the church. I want you. There, Catherine. His gaze dropped to the colt at her hip, visible now that she'd removed her apron. Seems you're already preparing. Always prepared, Emmett, she replied quietly. You should be too. After Holt left, Catherine closed the shop early for the first time in 12 years. She made her way to the small church at the edge of town, arriving before most of the townsfolk to observe them as they filtered in. Fear and determination mingled on their faces, the expressions of people who had survived drought, Apache raids, and the harsh frontier, now facing a new threat. James Smith arrived just as the meeting was about to begin, positioning himself at the back of the church with a clear view of all exits. His eyes locked with Catherine's for a moment, a silent promise passing between them. Sheriff Holt called the meeting to order, his voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. Friends, neighbors, I won't mince words. The Blackburn gang is heading this way, likely to arrive by tomorrow morning. Federal marshals can't reach us for at least 5 days. He paused, letting the murmurs subside. Anyone who wishes to leave should do so now. heading east toward Tucson in groups of no less than 4. Those staying need to prepare for trouble. Martha. McCreary stood, her voice trembling slightly. What chance do we have against such men? We're just simple folk. Simple folk who've survived everything the frontier has thrown at us, Jacob Dawson countered, rising to his feet. I say we stand and fight. This is our home. Arguments erupted throughout the church, some advocating flight, others calling for resistance. Catherine remained silent, watching the dynamics of the town she'd called home for 12 years. These were good people caught in a storm not of their making. Whatever her own fate, she couldn't abandon them now. Finally, when the shouting threatened to overwhelm any chance of productive discussion, Catherine stood. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. The Blackburns are coming for our money, our goods, and likely our lives, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. Running means losing everything you've built. Fighting means risking everything, including your lives. She surveyed the room, meeting the frightened eyes of her neighbors. I can't tell you what choice to make. That's for each of you to decide. But know this, if you stay, if you choose to defend Gallows Creek, I'll stand with you. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. From the back of the church, she heard Smith's soft chuckle as Daniel Cooper, the former soldier, stood next. Mrs. Winters has been training some of us in defense tactics. With her help and with proper planning, we can protect the town. To Catherine's surprise, Andrew Parnell rose shakily to his feet. I'm not a fighting man, he began, his voice barely audible, but this is our home. My wife heals people here. I catalogue the natural wonders of this region. There are things worth defending even for a scholar. Eleanor squeezed her husband's hand, pride evident in her expression. Gradually, a consensus formed. The most vulnerable, children, the elderly, the infirm, would take shelter in the church cellar, the most defensible building in town. The rest would form a defensive perimeter, using the buildings themselves as cover. As the meeting dispersed, Catherine found herself surrounded by townsfolk asking for advice, offering support, or simply expressing gratitude. She'd spent 12 years keeping these people at arm's length, fearing discovery. Now, on what might be the eve of her undoing, she felt more connected to them than ever before. Smith cornered her as she exited the church, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Quite the performance, Deadeye. Playing the hero now? Catherine met his gaze steadily. Better than playing the vulture, Smith. What's your real name anyway? A flicker of surprise crossed his features before his mask of confidence returned. Lawrence Thornton. The judge was my father. The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. Not just a bounty hunter then, a son seeking vengeance. Your father was a corrupt official who took bribes to hang innocent men, she said quietly. I did what the law couldn't, Thornton's eyes hardened. You murdered him in cold blood. I executed him for his crimes after a proper trial. The Rangers sanctioned it. A lie, Thornton hissed. My father was a good man. Catherine shook her head, seeing the blind devotion in his eyes. We both know that's not true, but we don't have time for this now. The Blackburns are coming, and they don't care about your vendetta. You think this changes anything? Thornton's hand moved subtly toward his concealed weapon. Once they're dealt with, you're still mine. If we survive, Catherine replied, stepping past him. That's a mighty big if, Mr. Thornton. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of preparation. Catherine distributed weapons and ammunition from her shop, ensuring everyone who could shoot had something to shoot with. Daniel Cooper organized defensive positions, while Eleanor Parnell prepared her clinic for potential casualties. By sunset, Gallows Creek had transformed from a sleepy frontier town to an armed camp. Barricades had been erected at key intersections, water barrels positioned to fight potential fires, and lookouts posted at the town's perimeter. Catherine returned to her shop as darkness fell, climbing to the small balcony on the second floor that offered a clear view of the western approach. The setting sun painted the desert in shades of crimson and gold, beautiful despite the danger it heralded. She wasn't surprised when Sheriff Holt joined her, his rifle cradled in his arms. "Quite a view," he remarked, gazing at the sunset. "Always." "Good thought so," Catherine replied. "It's why I built this place facing west. Thomas used to say we were always looking toward tomorrow." Holt was silent for a moment, then, "He was a good man, Thomas. Never really understood what brought you two out here, but he loved this town. Loved you. He did." Catherine's voice softened with the memory. "More than I deserved." "I don't believe that." Holt shifted, facing her directly. "Smith or Thornton, whatever his name is, he's not just worried about the Blackburns, is he? He's hunting you." Catherine met his gaze, seeing the knowledge already there in his eyes. "How long have you known, Emmett?" "Suspected for years." "Known for certain? Since I saw you wearing that colt like it was part of you." Holt shook his head. "I was a Texas Ranger before I came west, Catherine. The stories about Deadeye Kate were still fresh when I left." Catherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "And you never said anything." "Wasn't my business," Holt replied simply. "Whatever you did before, in Gallows Creek, you've been nothing but an asset to this community. That's all that matters to me. It might matter to others if they knew." Holt shrugged. "Maybe. But they might surprise you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Did you do it? Kill Judge Thornton?" "Yes." Catherine saw no point in lying now. He was selling verdicts to the highest bidder, innocent men hanged while murderers walked free. The Rangers couldn't touch him legally, so they sent me. And now his son wants revenge. Poetic, isn't it? Catherine's smile held no humor. The son hunting the executioner while the real criminals ride toward us unimpeded. Holt straightened, adjusting his gun belt. "Well, first things first. We survive the Blackburns, then worry about Thornton. If we survive," Catherine echoed her earlier words to Thornton. "We will." Holt's confidence seemed genuine. "Thanks to you, we're as ready as we'll ever be." As darkness settled over Gallows Creek, Catherine made a final inspection of the town's defenses. Cooper and the Sloan brothers had positioned themselves on the rooftops with rifles. Dawson and Miller manned the barricades at either end of Main Street. Even Andrew Parnell stood guard outside the church, shotgun held awkwardly but determinedly in his hands. Lawrence Thornton had taken up position. On the hotel balcony, his intentions unclear. Was he waiting for the Blackburns, or biding his time until he could claim his prize? Either way, Catherine kept him in her peripheral vision as she moved through the darkened streets. Returning to her shop, Catherine lit a single lamp on the ground floor, leaving the upper rooms dark to avoid creating silhouettes for potential shooters. She checked the Colt one final time, then settled into a chair near the window, the Navy revolver resting on her lap. Outside, the desert night had fallen silent. No coyotes called, no owls hooted, as if the wildlife sensed the approaching danger and had fled or hidden. From her position, Catherine could see the first stars appearing in the indigo sky, bright pinpricks of light in the gathering darkness. How many nights had she sat like this, waiting for death to come calling? Too many to count, yet this time felt different. Before, she had been a weapon pointed at a target, nothing more. Now she fought not just for herself, but for a home, for people who had accepted her even without knowing her full story. As the hours crept by, Catherine allowed her mind to drift to what might happen after, if they survived. Could she stay in Gallows Creek once the truth was known? Would her neighbors look at her with the same respect? Or would fear replace familiarity in their eyes? And what of Thornton? Even if he survived the coming fight, his obsession wouldn't simply vanish. As long as he lived, she would never truly be free. The soft creak of a floorboard pulled Catherine from her thoughts. Someone was moving stealthily through her shop. She remained motionless, controlling her breathing, ears straining to track the intruder's progress. Another creak. Closer. Now, followed by the subtle sound of a hammer being cocked. Catherine tensed, ready to move. "I know you're there, Deadeye." Thornton's voice came softly from the darkness. "No point hiding." Catherine stayed silent, shifting her weight imperceptibly to better her position. "I thought we might have our reckoning before the Blackburns arrive," he continued, moving closer. "Cleaner that way." In the dim lamplight, Catherine could just make out his silhouette, gun drawn, searching the shadows for her. She waited, patient as a rattlesnake. "Did you know," Thornton said conversationally, "that my father begged for his life? The great Judge Thornton, reduced to pleading before a slip of a girl with a gun." His voice hardened. "I've dreamed of this moment for 16 years, of watching you beg the same way before I kill you." Catherine realized he couldn't see her clearly in her shadowed corner. "His mistake. Your father didn't beg," she said finally, her voice calm. "He faced his judgment with dignity, more than you're showing now, sneaking around in the dark." Thornton whirled toward her voice, firing blindly. The bullet splintered the wall inches from Catherine's head as she rolled from her chair, the Colt coming up smoothly in her hand. "Drop it, Thornton," she commanded, now on one knee with the revolver aimed squarely at his chest. "This doesn't have to happen tonight." He froze, his own gun still raised, the standoff perfect in the lamplight's glow. 16 years, he said again, his voice breaking slightly. 16 years I've hunted you. "And now you've found me," Catherine replied. "But there are 7 killers riding toward this town, men who will slaughter everyone in their path. Your vendetta can wait." For a long moment Thornton didn't move. Then slowly he lowered his weapon. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Catherine agreed, "but it's postponed." As if to punctuate her words, 3 rapid gunshots echoed from the western edge of town, the warning signal they'd arranged. Catherine and Thornton locked eyes across the darkened room, mutual enemies suddenly faced with a greater threat. "They're early," Thornton observed, holstering his weapon. Catherine stood, the Colt still ready in her hand. "They're here!" The warning shots echoed through the night, sending Gallows Creek into immediate action. Lanterns were extinguished, shutters closed, defenders moving silently to their assigned positions. Catherine and Thornton stepped onto the porch of her shop, scanning the darkened street. "That's too early for the main group," Catherine muttered, more to herself than her companion. "Scouts, maybe." Thornton nodded, his vendetta temporarily set aside. "I counted 3 riders from my room earlier, probably checking the town's defenses." A flurry of gunfire erupted from the western edge, sharp cracks of rifle fire, followed by the deeper boom of a shotgun. Then silence fell again, heavy and ominous. Sheriff Holt materialized from the shadows, moving in a crouch. "They hit the West Barricade," he reported in a hushed voice. "Cooper and the Sloanes drove them back, but Jim took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc's with him now." "They'll be back," Catherine said, checking her Colt. "With the whole gang next time." "Agreed." Holt glanced at Thornton, then back to Catherine. "You two sorted your differences." "Postponed," Thornton answered tersely, "until the more immediate threat is handled." Holt nodded, accepting this uneasy alliance. "We need eyes on the western approach, need to know when they're coming and in what formation." "I'll go," Catherine said immediately. "I know the terrain." "I'm coming with you," Thornton declared, his tone brooking no argument. "To ensure you come back." Catherine studied him in the dim light, recognizing that his distrust might actually be useful in this situation. "Fine, but I lead, you follow. Quiet and low." Holt handed Catherine a spare Winchester rifle. "Signal if you spot them. 1 shot for 5 or fewer, 2 for more." He hesitated, then added, "Be careful, both of you." They slipped away from the town, using the natural contours of the desert landscape for cover. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate without lanterns, casting the saguaros and rock formations in silvery silhouette. Catherine moved with the silent confidence of someone intimately familiar with desert travel, while Thornton shadowed her with the disciplined quiet of a practiced hunter. Half a mile west of town, Catherine signaled for a stop, gesturing toward a rocky outcropping that offered both concealment and a clear view of the trail leading to Gallows Creek. They settled into position, the cool night air carrying the scent of creosote and dust. "Strange bedfellows," Thornton murmured after several minutes of silence, the executioner and the son of her victim waiting together in the dark. "Life has a peculiar sense of humor," Catherine replied, her eyes never leaving the trail. "Though I suspect neither of us finds it particularly amusing. You really believe my father was corrupt?" Catherine glanced at him, surprised by the genuine question in his voice. "I know he was. I saw the evidence, saw the ledger where he recorded payments for verdicts, saw the letters threatening families of defendants who couldn't pay." Thornton was silent for a long moment. "I was 15 when you killed him. All I knew was that my father, a respected judge, was shot dead in his chambers by a woman no older than 20. I was 19, Catherine confirmed, too young for such work looking back. But the Rangers were desperate. No male agent could get close enough." "And now?" Thornton asked. "Any regrets?" Catherine considered the question seriously. "Not for executing a man who sent innocents to the gallows, but for the path it set me on, for the years spent looking over my shoulder, for the family I lost." Her voice softened. "Yes, regrets enough to fill a desert." Before Thornton could respond, Catherine tensed, her hand raised for silence. In the distance, the faint sound of hoofbeats disturbed the night air. She raised the field glasses Holt had provided, scanning the horizon. Through the lenses, she could make out riders approaching at a steady pace, not bothering with stealth. She counted 7 men, spread in a loose formation that suggested confidence or arrogance. "They're coming," she whispered, passing the glasses to Thornton. "All 7. Thornton studied the approaching riders, his expression grim. "That's Wade. Blackburn in front. I recognize him from wanted posters. The one to his right is his brother Luke." Catherine raised the Winchester, aiming skyward. "One shot or two?" Thornton handed back the field glasses. "Wait, something's not right." He pointed to a dust cloud trailing behind the main group. "There's more coming." Catherine refocused the glasses, a chill running down her spine as she saw 3 additional riders, following some distance behind the main group. 10 altogether, more than we expected. They must have picked up more men after Cisco Junction. Thornton's voice was tight with tension. "Your town doesn't stand a chance." "It's not over yet," Catherine replied, firing 2 shots into the air. "The signal for more than 5 riders. Come on, we need to get back and adjust the defense." They retreated toward town, moving faster now that stealth was less critical. As they reached the outskirts, they could see defenders rushing to reinforce positions, guided by Sheriff Holt's shouted commands. Catherine grabbed Holt's arm as they rejoined him. 10 riders, Emmett, not 7. The sheriff's face fell momentarily. Before he regained his composure, "Where do you want me to position the extra men?" "We don't have extra men," Catherine replied. "We need a different strategy." She glanced around at the buildings lining Main Street. "They'll expect us to defend the whole town. We can't. We need to channel them, force them where we want them." Understanding dawned in Holt's eyes. "A trap." "Exactly." Catherine turned to Thornton. "You know Blackburn. What's his approach likely to be?" Thornton considered for a moment. "He'll send men around to flank the town while the main force hits. Straight down the center. Standard cavalry tactic." Catherine nodded. "Then we prepare accordingly. Pull everyone back from the perimeter. Let them think we're concentrated in the center of town." While Holt gathered the defenders, Catherine outlined her plan. They would appear to abandon the outer buildings, drawing the Blackburn gang into the center of town, where carefully positioned shooters could target them from multiple angles. "It's risky," Daniel Cooper observed, his military experience evident. In his assessment, "If they realize it's a trap before they're committed, they could burn the town around us." "Which is why the trap needs to be baited," Catherine replied, her gaze drifting to her gunsmith shop. "They'll expect the town's valuables to be hidden in the most secure building. We'll make them think that's my shop." "You're using yourself as bait," Eleanor Parnell said, her medical bag clutched tightly in her hands. "That's suicide, Catherine." "Not if it's done right." Catherine turned to the assembled townspeople. "I need volunteers to position themselves in the buildings surrounding my shop. Once the gang commits to the attack there, you'll have clear shots from multiple angles." Heads raised throughout the group. Dawson, Cooper, the remaining Sloan brother, Miller the blacksmith, and to everyone's surprise, Andrew Parnell. "I may not be a fighter," he said in response to his wife's concerned look, "but I can shoot straight. Enough from a stable position." Catherine assigned positions, distributing ammunition and giving last-minute instructions on signals and fields of fire. As the defenders dispersed to their positions, she found herself alone with Thornton once. "More, where do you want me?" he asked, checking his revolver. Catherine studied him, the question loaded with implications beyond the immediate crisis. "Can I trust you at my back, Thornton?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Against the Blackburns? Yes. After?" He holstered his weapon. "That remains to be seen." "Fair enough." She pointed to the general store across from her shop. "Second floor window. You'll have the clearest shot at anyone approaching the front of my shop." Thornton tipped his hat and moved to take his position, leaving Catherine to make her final preparations. She returned to her shop, removing the Colt Navy from its shadow box and replacing it with an empty replica she kept for repairs, similar enough to fool anyone who didn't know the original intimately. The genuine Colt she loaded, carefully checking each chamber before holstering it at her hip. From behind a false panel in the floorboards, she retrieved a second revolver, a newer model Remington, and tucked it into her waistband at the small of her back. Catherine positioned herself behind the counter, a lantern burning low beside her, making her shop the only visibly occupied building on the street. Then she waited, the patience of a predator settling over her like a familiar cloak. The hoofbeats came first, a distant rumble growing steadily louder, then shouts and the thunder of mounted men entering the town from multiple directions. Gunshots rang out, but only a few, token resistance as the defenders appeared to fall. Back according to plan. Through her window, Catherine could see riders circling in the street, their silhouettes dark against the night sky. A deep voice called out commands, Wade Blackburn directing his men to secure buildings, search for valuables. "And resistance. Ain't much of a fight," one voice crowed. "Town's barely defending itself." "Don't get cocky," came the reply, deeper, authoritative. "Check every building, shoot anyone who resists." Catherine tensed as footsteps approached her shop, heavy boots on the wooden porch. The door burst open, kicked inward with unnecessary force, and 3 men entered, guns drawn, faces shadowed beneath their hats. The leader stepped forward, a tall man with a thick mustache and cold eyes. Wade Blackburn himself, his reputation for viciousness evident in every line of his weathered face. "Well now," he drawled, taking in the shop with its displays of weapons. "What have we here? A woman gunsmith?" His gaze settled on Catherine, a predatory smile splitting his face. "That's a new one." Catherine remained perfectly still behind her counter. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" Blackburn laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Hear that, boys? The lady wants to know if she can help us." He approached the counter, holstering his revolver with theatrical slowness. "Matter of fact, you can. We're looking for valuables. Money, gold, anything worth taking. I suspect a gunsmith might have a fair bit tucked away. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Catherine replied evenly. Business hasn't been that good. Oh, I doubt that. Blackburn's gaze drifted to the shadow, box on the wall, now containing the replica Colt. That there's a fine piece. I might just take it as a souvenir. I wouldn't, Catherine said, her voice dropping slightly. It's not for sale. One of Blackburn's companions, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, snickered. She's got spine, Wade. Might be fun to break it. Blackburn raised a hand, silencing his companion without taking his eyes off Catherine. That old Navy Colt, Civil War era, isn't it? Bit outdated for practical use. It serves its purpose, does it now? Blackburn's smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. And what purpose would that be? Decoration? The third man, younger than the others with a patchy beard and nervous eyes, moved toward the shadow box. Let's have a look at this antique. I wouldn't touch that if I were you, Catherine warned, her hand dropping beneath the counter. The young outlaw paused, then laughed. You threatening me, lady? With what, a broom? He reached for the shadow box, fingers closing around the replica. Colt. Catherine's voice cut through the room, cold as steel. That's not the one you should be worried about. All three men froze, something in her tone finally registering the danger they were in. The one you should worry about, Catherine continued, her hand now visibly resting on the genuine Colt at her hip, is right here, and it's never failed to kill with one shot. Wade Blackburn's smile faltered as he studied Catherine more carefully, recognition dawning in his eyes. Well, I'll be damned, he said softly. Boys, we got ourselves a genuine celebrity here. The younger outlaw, still clutching the replica Colt, frowned in confusion. What are you talking about, Wade? I'm talking about the fact that we're standing in the presence of Deadeye Kate Holloway. Blackburn's voice held a mixture of amusement and newfound wariness. Thought you were dead. Disappointed, Catherine asked, the Colt now fully visible. In her hand, though not yet raised, the pockmarked outlaw's hand twitched toward his holster. That true? You're that ranger woman? Used to be, Catherine replied. Now I'm just a shopkeeper who'd like you gentlemen to leave her town. Blackburn chuckled, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. A shopkeeper with a Colt and a reputation. He spread his hands in a gesture of false civility. But here's the problem, Miss Holloway, or Mrs. Winters, whatever you're calling yourself these days. There's three of us, and only one of you. Count again, Catherine replied. On cue, the click of rifles being cocked echoed from outside, Thornton from the general store window, Dawson from the saloon, Cooper from the rooftop opposite. The trap was sprung. Blackburn's face darkened as he realized his mistake. You set us up. You walked right into it, Catherine confirmed. Now you can leave town peacefully, minus your weapons, or this gets ugly. For a moment, Catherine thought. Blackburn might actually consider the offer. Then the younger outlaw made his fatal error, dropping the replica and going for his gun in one desperate move. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Catherine's Colt cleared leather with fluid. Precision, the hammer cocking and firing in one smooth motion. The young outlaw was dead before he hit the floor. A neat hole centered in his forehead. The pockmarked man managed to get off one wild shot that splintered the counter beside Catherine before Cooper's rifle barked from outside, dropping him where he stood. Wade Blackburn, showing the survival instincts that had kept him alive through years of outlawry, dove behind a display case as bullets shattered the shop windows. Outside, chaos erupted as the rest of the Blackburn gang realized their leader was pinned down. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as the remaining outlaws exchanged shots with the town defenders. The trap had caught 3, but 7 remained. Inside the shop, Catherine's eyes locked with Blackburn's across the room, his face visible, through a gap in the fallen display case. Impressive setup, he conceded, his voice tight with controlled rage. But my men will burn this town to the ground to get me out. "Your men are outflanked and outnumbered," Catherine replied, though she knew the claim was optimistic at best. "Surrender, Blackburn. It's over." His laugh held no humor. "It's never over till the last man's dead, Deadeye. Thought you'd have learned that by now?" A tremendous crash from the rear of the shop interrupted their standoff as the back door splintered. Inward, Luke Blackburn charged through, firing wildly, forcing Catherine to duck behind the counter as bullets whizzed overhead. Wade seized the opportunity, scrambling toward his brother, using the shop's cabinets as cover. A shot from Thornton's position caught Luke in the shoulder, spinning him against the wall, but didn't stop him. The Blackburn brothers converged at the rear doorway, Wade providing covering fire as Luke staggered outside. Catherine rose from behind the counter, the Colt tracking Wade as he backed toward the exit. Their eyes met one final time, Predator recognizing Predator, before he vanished into the darkness. Outside, the gunfight had spread throughout the town. Catherine stepped onto her porch, reloading the Colt with practiced efficiency. Sheriff Holt appeared at her side, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "They're trying to circle around behind the church," he reported, his breathing labored. "Dawson's pinned down in the saloon. Cooper's holding the rooftop, but they've got a man with a rifle keeping him from getting clear shots." Catherine surveyed the chaotic scene, mind calculating angles and positions. "The brothers went out the back. They'll be trying to regroup." "We're spread too thin," Holt admitted. "If they coordinate an assault—" "They won't," Catherine interrupted. "Wade's wounded and angry. He'll want revenge more than tactics now." She checked her second revolver. "I'm going after him." "That's suicide," Holt protested. Catherine offered a thin smile. "Only if I miss." Before Holt could object further, Catherine slipped into the shadows between buildings, moving toward the rear of her shop where the Blackburns had escaped. The sounds of gunfire provided cover for her footsteps as she tracked their path through the darkness, following drops of blood gleaming black in the moonlight. The trail led toward the dried creek bed that gave the town its name, where cottonwoods provided cover and the terrain offered escape routes in multiple directions. Catherine moved with the silent precision of her ranger days, every sense alert to the slightest disturbance in the night. A whispered conversation reached her ears, Wade and Luke Blackburn arguing over their next move, their voices carrying in the still desert air. "We should cut our losses," Luke insisted, pain evident in his strained voice. "The town's more trouble than it's worth." "And let that ranger bitch make fools of us?" Wade snarled. "Not happening. We need to regroup with the others, hit them, from all sides at once." Catherine crept closer, using the cottonwoods for cover, the Colt held ready at her side. She could just make out their silhouettes in the shadows. Luke, propped against a boulder, clutching his wounded shoulder. Wade, pacing like a caged wolf. She was about to step forward when instinct made her freeze. The slight crunch of boot on gravel behind her was the only warning before a gun barrel pressed against the back of her head. "Drop it, Deadeye," came a gravelly voice she didn't recognize. "Or the last thing you'll feel is my trigger finger." Catherine stiffened but didn't release her weapon. "If you shoot, they'll know exactly where you are. My people will cut you down before I hit the ground." Brave talk from a woman with a gun. To her head, the pressure increased. "I ain't asking twice." The moment stretched like drawn wire, taut and trembling. Then a new voice cut through the darkness. "I'd reconsider that position if I were you." Lawrence Thornton stepped into view, his revolver aimed steadily at Catherine's captor. "Your move, friend. But I should warn you, I've been waiting 16 years to kill this woman myself. I'd take it poorly if you robbed me of the opportunity." The gambit worked. The outlaw's confusion at this apparent betrayal caused his gun to waver just enough. Catherine dropped to one knee, the barrel passing harmlessly over her head as she brought the Colt up and fired. The outlaw crumpled without a sound. The shot alerted the Blackburn brothers. Wade's voice rang out, "Over there, by the big cottonwood." Bullets splintered bark inches from Catherine's head as she rolled behind the tree trunk. Thornton dove for cover behind a boulder, returning fire, but unable to get a clear shot. "You follow me all these years just to save my life, Thornton?" Catherine called, keeping her voice light despite the gravity of their situation. "Consider it a professional courtesy," he replied between shots. "Couldn't let some random outlaw steal my vengeance." Catherine laughed despite herself. "Fair enough." She peered around the tree, catching a glimpse of Wade Blackburn trying to drag his wounded brother toward better cover. "Cover me!" Without waiting for acknowledgement, Catherine broke from her position, racing in a zigzag pattern as Thornton laid down, suppressing fire. Wade abandoned his brother, turning to face this new threat directly, his revolver tracking Catherine's movement. Time seemed to slow as Catherine raised the Colt Navy, muscle memory and instinct guiding her aim. Wade fired first, his bullet grazing, her arm in a line of fire, but Catherine's shot flew true, striking Wade Blackburn square in the chest. He staggered back, disbelief etched on his features, before falling face down in the dirt. Luke Blackburn stared in horror at his fallen brother, then raised his hands in surrender as both Catherine and Thornton trained their weapons on him. "It's over," Catherine told him. "Call off your men." Luke nodded wearily, rising to his feet with effort. "Stand down," he bellowed, his voice carrying across the night. "Wade's down! Stand down!" Gradually, the gunfire throughout Gallows Creek subsided as word spread among the surviving outlaws. With their leader dead and their advantage lost, the fight drained from them. One by one, they emerged from cover, throwing down their weapons as Holt and the town defenders took them into custody. In the sudden quiet, Catherine became aware of the warm trickle of blood down her arm, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the weight of the Colt in her hand. Sensations from another life she'd thought long behind her. She turned to Thornton, who stood watching her with an unreadable expression. "Now what?" she asked simply. Thornton holstered his weapon slowly. "That's the question, isn't it?" He gestured to her bloodied arm. "You should have that looked at." "Don't change the subject," Catherine replied, though there was no edge to her words. 16. "Years of hunting me comes down to this moment. What's your play?" Thornton ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking tired rather than dangerous. "You know what's strange? All these years I've had an image in my head of the cold-blooded killer who murdered my father, the notorious Deadeye Kate." His voice softened. "But that woman doesn't exist, does she? Not anymore." "She never did," Catherine said quietly. "Not the way the stories told it. No, I suppose not." Thornton gazed at the stars for a long moment. "I saw you out there tonight. Saw how you protected these people, how they trust you." He shook his head. "The woman who executed my father wouldn't have done that." "Your father was corrupt, Lawrence," Catherine said, using his first name deliberately. "I'm sorry you had to grow up with that legacy. But the truth doesn't change because we don't want to see it." Thornton nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but vengeance doesn't feel the same when the target's changed." He met her gaze directly. "I need time to think." Before Catherine could respond, Sheriff Holt approached, leading a group of townspeople including Eleanor Parnell, who immediately moved to examine Catherine's wound. "The rest of the gang secured," Holt reported. 2 dead, 3 wounded, 4 surrendered. He glanced at Thornton, then back to Catherine. "And you too?" "We've reached an understanding," Catherine replied, wincing as Eleanor cleaned her wound. "Of sorts." As Eleanor worked, Catherine surveyed the gathering crowd of townsfolk, men and women she'd kept at a distance for 12 years, now looking at her with newfound respect rather than the fear she'd anticipated. Daniel Cooper offered a silent nod of acknowledgement. Jacob Dawson raised an imaginary glass in salute. Even Andrew Parnell, still clutching the shotgun she'd given him, managed a shaky smile. "They know, don't they?" she asked Holt quietly. "About who I was." "Word spreads fast in a small town," he confirmed. especially when its resident gunsmith turns out to be a legendary markswoman. Catherine sighed. I suppose I'll need to be moving on then. Now, why would you do that? Martha McCreary pushed forward, hands on her hips. Who do you think fixed my grandfather's rifle when it jammed? Who taught my boy to shoot straight? You think we care what name you used before you came here? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Catherine looked from face to face, searching for signs of rejection or fear, finding instead the simple acceptance of a frontier community that judged people by their actions rather than their histories. This is your home, Catherine, Eleanor said softly as she finished bandaging the wound. It has been for 12 years. Nothing's changed that, but something had changed. As Catherine stood amid the people of Gallows Creek, the Colt Navy, a familiar weight at her hip, she realized the walls she'd built between her past and present had finally crumbled. Not in catastrophe as she'd feared, but in liberation. She caught Thornton watching her, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. Whatever reckoning lay between them would come another day. For now, the night belonged to Gallows Creek and its survivors. Catherine holstered the Colt that had never failed her, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Well, she said, addressing the gathered townspeople, I suppose someone's going to have to repair all those broken windows and bullet holes. She glanced at her damaged shop front. And I know just the place to start. 3 weeks after the Blackburn gang's attack, Gallows Creek had largely returned to normal. Bullet holes had been patched, broken windows replaced, and buildings repaired. The surviving outlaws had been transported to Tucson to await trial, accompanied by Sheriff Holt and a contingent of federal marshals who had arrived too late for the fight, but just in time for the paperwork. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Catherine applied a fresh coat of paint to her shop's front porch. The sound of hammering echoed from down the street, where Daniel Cooper and the Sloan brothers were completing repairs on the saloon's roof. In the distance, church bells rang, calling the faithful to Sunday service. Shop looks better than new, a familiar voice observed. Catherine turned to find Lawrence Thornton watching her from the street, hat in hand. His appearance had softened somewhat. Gone was the formal suit, replaced by practical trail clothes. The hard edge in his eyes had diminished, though not disappeared entirely. Returning customers appreciate a place that doesn't look like it. Was shot to pieces, Catherine replied, setting down her paintbrush. I thought you'd left town. I did. Thornton approached the porch steps, remaining at a respectful distance. Rode to Tucson, then up to Prescott. Did some thinking. And I visited the territorial archives. He produced a folded paper from his coat pocket. Found this. Thought you might want to see it. Catherine wiped her hands on her apron before accepting the document. As she unfolded it, her breath caught. It was a formal pardon, yellowed with age, but still legible, signed by the territorial governor. At the top, her name, Catherine Holloway, and below, a full exoneration for the death of Judge Samuel Thornton, citing evidence of judicial corruption and service to the Rangers. Where did you find this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Buried in the records, never delivered because you disappeared. Thornton's expression was unreadable. All these years, I hunted a woman who was officially pardoned. Catherine carefully refolded the document. Would it have mattered if you'd known? I don't know, he admitted. The boy I was needed someone to blame. The man I became needed a purpose. He gestured to the pardon. Finding that, it complicated things. Life usually does. Catherine studied him carefully. So, what now, Lawrence? Still planning to kill me? A ghost of a smile crossed his features. No, though I can't claim to have forgiven you entirely. Some wounds take more than a piece of paper to heal. He looked past her to the repaired shop. But I've seen enough to know you've built something worth preserving here. Something good. Catherine, You felt a weight she'd carried for 16 years begin to lift. Not completely. Some burdens never fully disappear, but enough to straighten her shoulders, to breathe more freely. "Will you stay in Gallows Creek?" she asked. Thornton shook his head. "No, too many ghosts between us. But I won't be hunting. You anymore either." He replaced his hat. "Sheriff Holt mentioned they might need a deputy in Prescott. Thought I might apply." "You'd make a decent lawman," Catherine observed. "You're certainly stubborn enough." This earned a genuine laugh. High praise coming from the infamous Deadeye Kate. He extended his hand. "Goodbye, Catherine Winters." She took his hand, the gesture sealing an unlikely peace. "Goodbye, Lawrence Thornton." After he departed, Catherine returned to her painting, the pardon tucked safely in her pocket. A new customer might have found the scene unremarkable, just a gunsmith tending to her shop on a quiet Sunday morning. But the townsfolk who passed by exchanged knowing nods with the woman they now understood had always been more than she appeared. Later, that afternoon, as the desert heat began to wane, Catherine made her way to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Gallows Creek. She hadn't visited Thomas's grave in nearly a year, the memories too painful to confront regularly, but today felt different. She knelt beside the simple marker, clearing away wind-blown debris from the engraved name. "You were right, Thomas," she said softly. "You always said the truth would come out eventually." Her fingers traced the weathered stone. "And you were right that I'd still have a home when it did." The setting sun painted the desert in shades of amber and gold, the beauty of it still capable of taking her breath away after all these years. From this vantage point, Catherine could see the entire town spread below. The church where the Sunday social was now underway, the saloon already filling with evening customers, Eleanor Parnell's clinic where Jim Sloan was recovering from his wound, and her own shop standing resolute at the eastern end of Main Street. As darkness began to settle over the land, Catherine made her way back down the hill. Sheriff Holt was waiting at the bottom, his badge catching the last rays of sunlight. "Council, meeting tomorrow," he said as she approached. "They're voting on appointing a deputy. Your name came up." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "I'm a gunsmith, Emmett, not a lawman." "You're both, seems to me." Holt fell into step beside her as they walked toward town. "Town needs someone who can shoot straight and think straight. Figure you qualify on both counts." "And they don't mind my history," Holt chuckled. "Catherine, after what happened with the Blackburns, your history is precisely what they want." He glanced at her. "Besides, Jacob Dawson says deputizing the legendary Deadeye Kate would bring in tourists." This drew a surprised laugh from Catherine. "Now he's just being ridiculous." "Maybe so." Holt's expression grew serious. "But the offer's genuine. Sleep on it?" Catherine nodded, though she already knew her answer. For 12 years she'd hidden who she truly was, kept her skills and her past locked away like the Colt in its shadow box. Now, with nothing left to hide, perhaps it was time to use those abilities openly, to protect the home and people she'd come to love. Back at her shop, Catherine lit the lamp and moved to the workbench where the Colt Navy now rested. No longer hidden in a shadow box, but displayed proudly on a custom-made stand. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight and balance, a tangible connection between who she had been and who she had become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a deputy's badge perhaps, and all the responsibilities that came with it. But tonight, in the quiet of her shop with the desert stars visible through the window, Catherine Winters, once known as Deadeye Kate, was finally, completely at peace. The ancient cult that had never missed its mark had found its true purpose, not as an instrument of vengeance or justice, but as a guardian of home and hearth. And in the end, that was all Catherine had ever truly wanted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.